Thank you for joining us here. I'll just quickly introduce our speakers for today. Our speakers for this evening are Vinita Nair and Sujan Singha. Vinita Nair, she's a senior resident and trainer at Genpact Better World Initiative. At Genpact, her role involves coaching residents on process transformation tools, data analysis, statistics, training the team on Lean Six Sigma methods, facilitating learning and development for the team. And prior to Better World Initiative, Benita worked in the corporate for 17 years across different verticals of business, supporting the data analytics function. Thank you and welcome, Benita.
Thank you so much.
Sujan Singha is a senior resident, Genpact Better World Initiative. He has 12 plus years of work experience in the development sector, working with organizations, state governments, and CSR in various process re-engineering projects. At Genpact at present, he is working as a Lean and Six Sigma and design thinking coach for non-profits. Welcome, Sujan. Thank you for being here. With that, I think I'll hand the floor over to you.
So while we try to answer what are the prerequisites for sustainable technology development and implementation. So coming to technology, which has taken a center stage for discussion, it's imperative to understand what goes in building the technology as a final solution. In the journey of deciphering the key elements of sustainable tech, functioning of robust processes play a very critical role, helping to decide its readiness for utilizing technology. And in addition, people also play a very critical role where they drive the adoption of the technology through these processes. For any successful operations, people, process, and technology need to work in harmony. And the message that we want to bring over here is technology is only as effective as the process utilizing it and the people who handle it. Now, I would like to bring about a presentation around a project that we worked in Better World Initiative, where there was a need for technology intervention and how we actually assessed the existing process, went deeper into the process at an L3, N4 level, identified the gaps, the challenges that existed in the process. We also identified what was the risk associated with the failure on the current process, designed a 2B process, made it tech ready, which was a foundation, which I would say acted as a foundation for tech intervention. So let's get to understand how processes play a very critical role through an example. So there was a need for a tech intervention for an organization for their supply chain process. Now, this organization worked to empower women by improving their livelihood, by training them to become entrepreneurs. Now, since they were working as entrepreneurs, there were certain products that they were selling in their villages. And this organization was responsible for making those products and handing it over to those women who kind of got back to this organization at regular intervals, giving them the details of the orders that came in from the various customers. Now, since it was a supply chain that was functioning on the ground, it was essential to understand what was the kind of supply chain that was operating, how was the raw material that was being sourced, how was the inventory that was being managed, how did the manufacturing team operate, as to whether they had idea around how to manage the inventory based on the orders that came in, and how to handle the need or the number of products or the processing that needed to happen to get to the final product. Then, of course, understanding how the warehouse functioned with respect to packing of these products till the last mile delivery. It was also essential to understand some of the external links over here, like the role of the suppliers, the role of the carriers who played a very important role in the last mile delivery. So an end-to-end study of the supply chain process. Similarly, we had to understand how the various functions linked to each other and how the supply chain function performed. So, for example, what was the optimal inventory that was needed? What was the kind of demand that was coming in? What was the time taken to meet the customer requirements? Basically, what was the on-time delivery number, the days that it took, or the number of okay, the number of days it took to actually make a delivery, and how the communication was managed, because there was a dependency with different departments. So it was essential to understand how communication was managed between the different departments. And the need over here was to transition this entire supply chain process into an ERP platform. So, as mentioned, it was essential to understand whether these processes were standardized, whether there were certain guidelines around how these processes operated, whether the team was aware as to how they need to operate. Then, were these processes repeatable? Which means there were no random interventions to these process based on any specific kind of exceptions. So, exception handling was part of the regular process. And also how efficient and simplified these processes were. What did the team feel about this process? Okay, so a detailed study of the process was done on the supply chain to understand all of these aspects, and what unfolded were the list of these challenges. What I have mentioned over here is in a very generic form, but we did a detailed analysis of the process right from sourcing. When the order comes into the team, how did they manage the sourcing of raw materials? How did they do the stocking of the materials? How did they move these materials from the warehouse to the manufacturing? And how was the inventory adjusted? How was the relationship with the suppliers and the carriers? So all these aspects were studied. And as we could see, some of the challenges listed here were the processes were running in silos. All right. So the procurement team did not know what was happening in manufacturing team. The manufacturing did not know what was happening in logistics team. So it was broken amongst the departments. There was no communication. So, for example, data was entered on inventory by the operations team. It was entered by the warehouse team. It was also entered by the manufacturing team. So, as you can see, nobody was aware. There was no central team that was aligned to each of these activities. So, and similarly, there was no communication regarding this. There were no standards established. So, the people were not aware what it means to operate at specific guidelines, or what it means to have a perfect process. No understanding of what drives performance. So there was no indicators in place to really help them understand what was going wrong, And similarly, whatever information came in, whether it was related to sourcing of the raw materials, whether it was related to the inventory data, whether it was related to the raw materials and the end products and the storage, all these information was stored in disparate sources. So there was no single source of truth. Now that you have understood that there was a need for an ERP, we tried to, before even taking the leap into an ERP, we stepped back to study the different processes within the supply chain. We really needed to understand the quality level. We did a quick assessment of the quality of these processes, and we identified the challenges. Now the question arises as to how did we identify the gaps? It was just not about through any questionnaires or through interviews, but we had to go through some methodologies to really get into these processes, to really understand what these steps were within the processes, how did the supply chain team function with respect to these processes. So in the upcoming slides, I will just walk you through some of these methods that we have borrowed from the DMAC methodology, which we used in our 4D to identify these gaps. All right. And the first one, before even I get into the first one, I just want to bring about a quote by Edward Deming, who is an American engineer, a famous American engineer. If you can't describe what you are doing as a process, you don't know what you are doing. Okay, so it really resonates with what exactly was observed in the supply chain process. Because even though the people knew that they were functioning, they were actually acting on the requirements, they didn't know that they were functioning as a process. So there was a certain level of lack of awareness regarding the linkage that was needed across the various departments. So to understand the process first, we use the methodology COPUS, which expands to customers, output, process, input, and suppliers. So what this means is it helps us to understand at the process at a very high level. Okay, it could be just at a 5 to 6 steps the processes are described. And apart from the processes, this tool also helps us to understand what are the inputs and the outputs of these processes. Okay, and for these inputs, who are the suppliers of these inputs? Okay, what is the output of this process, and who are the recipients of this output? And as mentioned before, This was done to understand what is the process at a very high level, also to understand, taking our example, the ERP example, we'll try to understand who are the suppliers for the inputs to these process, because there were various processes starting from all the way from sourcing of raw materials till the last mile delivery of the product. There were various suppliers to the process, the different inputs that help to run the steps in the process, then the output of the process. So once the process was executed, what was the output of the process steps, and who were the recipient of the outputs. Okay, so that was the first step. However, the challenge over here was, since the process was at a very high level, one could not navigate the process or get a pixelated view of the process to really understand what went into the process in running these process, or what was the root of these processes. So as a next step, we did a as is process mapping. Okay, we actually got deeper into the process to understand what exactly was functioning right now within the entire supply chain. We studied first at the L1 level, then we broke the L1 into L3, L2, L3, and finally at an L4 level. So you can understand the depth at which we have got into the process to really understand how it was functioning currently. So we also took all the exceptions over here to really understand how the team functioned in all those instances and try to understand some of the weaknesses over here. So in this complete exercise, it was essential for us to understand how this entire process worked, which helped us to also understand what were the inefficiencies. Because this was the starting point for us, which helped us to understand what are some of the inefficiencies that needs to be looked at, what are some of the gaps that needs to be plugged so that it is made more efficient, robust, and ready for a tech intervention. So once the as-is process was done, it was also essential to understand within the process what were some of the failures that were happening, what were the consequences of those failures, and what was the control mechanism that the organization had to counter these failures. So as you can see, we need to have these precautionary measures for these set of failures, because some of these failures are very risk and can stall the complete process. For example, in case of our project, we saw that there was nothing called as an optimum inventory management. Whatever came as extra post procurement was considered as an inventory. So when there was a surplus demand that was coming in from the field, it was a just-in-time action by the sourcing team. So they had to immediately get in touch with the supplier, negotiate with them, because there was a cost implication associated with it. If they need the material faster, they had to pay extra. So as you can see, it actually hampered the entire process. It actually derailed the processing, because if there is a delay from the supplier side in sending off the products or sending the raw materials to the supply chain team, then it delays the entire manufacturing and the last mile delivery, which ultimately ended in customer giving up on the order, and the saki or the women in the field getting demotivated because she has lost an order. So it's very essential to have that mitigation plan in place for every kind of failure, because the consequences of the failure uh, can will not yield good, will be really bad for the overall setup that for the program that they have for the rural women. So FMEA is a tool that helps to address here, which expands to failure mode effect analysis. The failure is to track the potential and the failures that we have already observed. Then we try and understand what are the consequences of the failures, the impact of the failure, and what are the causes of the failure. And a risk analysis is done to understand which are those high risk or the risk areas that needs to be focused or prioritized in a process. So once we understood the gaps, once we understood the challenges and the areas that needs to be fixed, and also the failure points or the high risk points, post the study, we designed what is called as a to-be process. All right. So as you can see over here, we understood where the interventions are needed, where the limitations in terms of the process being inefficient, or the linkage is not established, or the lack of awareness by the team on what an efficient process is. So we redesigned the entire process after understanding all the gaps and challenges and taking into account the opportunity areas for improvement. created the to-be process, and made it ready for a technology implementation. So, this is a success story of how a process played a very critical role, wherein it helped us understand that whether the existing process was tech ready for implementation or whether it needed any kind of changes so that it's ready for any kind of technology to make it more sustainable and adopted by the team. So that's about the process, and I will hand this over to Sujan, who will speak about the next element, which is people who play another critical role in technology implementation. Over to you, Sujan.
Yeah, thank you, Benita, and hello, everyone. And so, as Benita kind of highlighted, multiple tools, like three major tools that we use to understand the processes and then understand the challenges and the gaps. And then we finally create a to be process, which actually paves the way for technology development. Yeah. So in next a kind of couple of slides, I'm going to talk about two critical steps, process steps that you need to follow to onboard a sustainable technology. Yeah? So first, checking your organization readiness, or which we in our business term we call technology maturity assessment. Yeah? So you need to understand the maturity level of your existing people, process, and technology. And the second element is creating a comparative analysis. You need to create a comparative analysis between the products, between the technology that are available in the market that suits to your maturity level, that suits to your organization maturity level. So Benita has already sort of talked in detail about how you can evaluate your current processes and then identify the gaps and challenges and form a to-be process. So I will mostly focus on understanding the people's readiness or people's maturity and technology infrastructure maturity, how you can assess those maturity. So to check people's readiness for any new technology that you need to that you are planning to implement, there are three elements. First one is check the availability of people. Yeah? People who you want to use the technology. Are those people are there in right position to use that technology or to sort of operate the different functions of the technology? The second element is, are people skilled enough within your organization? Are they skilled enough? Their digital literacy, are they tech savvy enough to handle a particular technology? So that level of skills that you have to access. The third one is their motivation or their willingness, yeah, their attitude towards technology, their openness towards a new technology solution. So all these three, availability, skill, and motivation, yeah, all these three things you have to assess in terms of assessing the people's maturity of your organization. In order to assess the technology infrastructure maturity, again, there are three elements that you need to look at, which is availability of the hardware infrastructure. Do you have smartphones, laptop, desktop, or internet connectivity in order to implement a particular technology solution? And then whether you have software infrastructure or not. Yeah? Do you have permissions or license or web spaces, for example, MS Office or any sort of web space that is required to onboard a particular technology and implement that? And the third one is accessibility of all these infrastructure by the people. So is there only leadership, those who have access to all these IT infrastructure, or is there middle management who have access to all these infrastructure, or is it across the organization you have access to all these infrastructure? So that you need to evaluate when you are evaluating the IT infrastructure, or which we call the technology maturity assessment, and plus the maturity of your processes. So combining all three, your people, process, and technology maturity assessment will help you to decide what type of technology solution will be suitable in your context based on the readiness of your people, process, and technology. Yeah. Now that you have a fair clarity on the organization readiness, you know your people, process, and technology maturity, there might be multiple tech solutions that are available in the market. Yeah. You might find multiple services, tech services that are being provided in the market. So which solution you should go for? Now you know your people, process, and technology maturity, but which solution you should go for? For that particular thing, we have created a framework which we call tech assessment rubric, technology assessment rubric. And under that, we majorly assess three different elements. First, functionality. Based on your to-be process, based on your maturity, you need to identify what all functionality that you will be required for the technology to perform. And accordingly, you will select the technology. The second thing is support structure or post-sale support, which we call in our business term. When you are buying a technology, or even if you are kind of getting an open source technology, there need to be some post implementation, post technology adoption support, like kind of technology adoption support. Because people on the field, once they start implementing the technology, trying to sort of play around with the technology, they need that support, or you further need some customization support as your organization evolve or progress. The third important element that you need to keep in mind while finalizing a particular technology is funding. Because in development sector, what we have seen from our experience, funding becomes a major constraint while we are finalizing a particular technology. And then we majorly go for some open source technology. So while you are considering funding, there are three different elements in funding that you need to take into consideration. First, the IT infrastructure. So if you are kind of adopting a particular technology, what sort of IT infrastructure that you need to kind of implement that technology? The developing or customization requirement. Is there any, if you are using the open source platform like Google, Google Data Studio, and there are multiple open source platforms. If you are using those, then there is certain amount of customization that is required. So fund required for the customization. Then you also need to consider the fund requirement for maintenance and upgradation. Because over a period of time, as I said, that you will require upgrading and maintaining that particular technology. So you need to consider the funding for that. And after you have all the information for all the suitable technology in the market, you do a comparative analysis. You do a comparison between multiple technology on functionality, support structure, and fund requirements. And then you arrived on that best suitable technology option for your organization, which suits to your maturity, which suits to your funding, which suits to your requirement. So that is when so technology maturity assessment and technology identification rubrics are very important in order to identify that particular technology that we will be selecting and onboarding. I will just elaborate this with a small example. So last year, we worked with a nonprofit who came to us. Their requirement was to build a MIS system. So an MIS system can be built simply using Excel and Excel level dashboard. It can be also built using Google environment like Google Form, Google Sheets, Google Data Studio to sort of showcase the dashboard. It can also be used in, so we can also sort of create that MIS through a software building an entire coding, an entire kind of software for that organization. So there are three different options that are available in front of the organization, but this tech maturity assessment and the tech selection rubric help us to select the best suitable option for their organization. And then we kind of identify one particular technology option that will be best suitable for that organization. Can we move to the next?
Yeah.
So the next, now you have set up a process, you evaluate your organization maturity, you identify the suitable technology for your organization, and you develop that technology. Now it comes to sustaining the technology. Yeah? How will you ensure that the technology that you have selected or that you have onboarded is kind of sustained over a period of time and give you that return and help you in improving your organization efficiency for which the technology was onboarded? So in order to ensure sustainability, there are three key elements of any technology. Yeah. First is a clear implementation plan. You need to have a clear goal, yeah, with both short-term and long-term targets. Yeah? So what you're going to see in a 6 months time with the technology and what you're going to see in over a period of 2 years from the technology, and how the technology is going to help your organization and your people to improve the overall efficiency of the organization. Then defining roles and responsibility of each and every stakeholder across the hierarchy of the organization. Who will play what role in that technology? How the technology will be used by different people in the organization. So that has to be listed out. Is there any requirement for IT infrastructure development? If the technology requires any IT infrastructure, so that development needs to be done. That IT infrastructure needs to be in place. Then only that technology will sustain for a longer period of time. And also forecasting a kind of risk mitigation plan. Often we have seen that people onboard technology without giving much thought on the risk that it might bring to their organization. For example, there's an organization who have onboarded a MIS system in a virtual framework, and they lost all the data. So you need to forecast all the risk that might come with the technology and then plan accordingly. Those risk mitigation plans should be with you. The second key elements for sustaining the technology is upskilling your people. You cannot sustain a particular technology without upscaling your people, without orienting and without continuous support to people to implement the technology or using that technology for which the technology was onboarded. So for that, you need to identify the effect and usage of technology across the organization and orient them on their each and everyone's roles and responsibility related to that particular technology. And a continuous upskilling plan. It cannot be a one-time upskilling orientation. It has to be a continuous. Yeah? It has to be a continuous plan. Provide on-site support while they are actually interacting or using that technology. The third key element is setting up a governance and feedback structure, which is very critical and essential for sustaining the technology. Like creating a change monitoring system. So what all indicators that you have decided that you will be achieving those indicators by over a period of time. You need to monitor, you need to kind of your leadership or your mid-level leadership or your field level implementation team need to come together and on a periodic basis and evaluate that how much they have achieved or whether the technology, what is the requirement for probably upgrading the technology, or is it meeting the requirement for which it was onboarded. So you have to continuously do those governance, and the governance need to be based on the particular data. You need to identify the data elements in order to check the effectiveness of the technology in your organization context, and then having a governance on that on a regular basis. Now, these three elements, as I have mentioned, a clear implementation plan, upskilling of your people, and setting up a strong governance and feedback structure will help you to sustain the technology over a period of time. Now, I will quickly take you through a small case study. It's an organization that we have worked with in Assam. So Assam actually witnessed around 20 to 30% of all pregnancy cases belonging to high-risk pregnancy category, which leads to majority of the fetal deaths. Then we collaborated with the nonprofit and worked with Assam state government to understand the processes around HRP, high-risk pregnancy identification, their management, what are the gaps and the challenges. We also did the same evaluation, people, process, and technology maturity evaluation to understand the current existing capacity of the team to implement kind of a technology solution. And then we identified a to-be process. And also in this particular project, we kind of collaborated with organization and the Assam government health department to strengthen and identify and classify the entire and referral process of the HRP. Yeah. So how are they doing? How are they identifying? How are they classifying? How are they referring all these HRP cases? So we kind of identify all the process around that HRP case maintenance, identification and maintenance. And then that leads to a technology development. So as we were emphasizing throughout our presentation that how process plays a very important role in setting a path for technology development. Without fixing your processes, without standardizing or without having a replicable process, you cannot onboard a particular technology. So we did the same. We standardized, we identify those standardized steps in this case of managing high-risk pregnancy cases. And as we kind of forecast that over a period of 2 years, there will be 800 women who will be sort of benefited with this. And the reengineering, the process reengineering that we have done, and the identification and classification of the processes will also sort of enable the entire health system to identify the high-risk pregnancy at a very earlier stage, and which will lead to reduction in maternal mortality rate over a period of time. So that's what we wanted to share with all of you, that how technology, before identification of any technology, you need to strengthen your process, you need to standardize your processes. Then only you should go for a technology solution.